Well, Sanders did an interview this weekend, and I thought it was worth covering, so I'll play it and give my commentary.
As Senator Sanders wrote in a recent op-ed for The Guardian, campaigning on an economic agenda that speaks to the needs of working families is a winning formula for Kamala Harris and for Democrats in November. Indeed, it is the formula that could give Harris the sort of victory that sweeps in a Democratic Senate and a House and allows her to govern in the best tradition of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal and Joe Biden's Build Back Better program, end quote. Joining me now is the independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. He's the chair of the Senate Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee. He's a member of the Veterans Affairs, Budget, and Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator, great to see you again. Thank you for being with us. I just wanted to tackle this because you're somebody who has fought for many of these policies. I don't think you particularly care that people call you leftist and radical and communist and whatever the case is. But I think it's time to just put it out there that that's just not true. In these, you may be, but that's not true of these policies, right? They are mainstream policies in a lot of countries.
All right, Ali, let me tell you what drives me a little bit nuts. We have campaigns where candidates go around attacking each other, and the corporate media gets into political gossip. You know, we don't talk about what's happening to working families. We don't talk about sensible solutions, which, as you indicate, already exist in countries all over the world. In many ways, we are the outlier. I am talking to you right now from Burlington, Vermont. 50 miles north of us is a country called Canada, not a radical communist country. Somehow in Canada, spending 1/2 as much per capita on health care as we do, they manage to provide quality care to every man, woman, and child in this country. And meanwhile, their life expectancy is better than ours is. Their health care outcomes are better than ours is. So the question of providing health care to all people, not a radical idea, something that most Americans support. We did a poll, as you indicate. And we know that in America today, you got a whole lot of senior citizens who are struggling. In fact, half the seniors in America are trying to get by on $30,000 or less. Overwhelming 70% plus support for expanding Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and vision, including a strong majority of Republicans. Expanding Social Security benefits by $2,400 by lifting the cap, which now exists, so that the wealthy pay more into the Social Security Trust Fund, supported by 70% of the American people. Demanding the wealthy stop paying and large corporations stop paying their fair share of taxes, supported by over 70% of the American people. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, widely supported. So on all of these issues that Trump calls far left or communist, well, I don't know, maybe we're a far left country, I don't know. But these are common sense issues that working class families support.
In fact, let me just make the argument that some of these things are conservative, because if you are going to pay half as much for health care and get better outcomes, right? I mean, that's pro-money, that's pro-business, that's pro-everybody, right? We pay less for more outcome. And that's what you're talking about here in almost all these cases.
Hey, Ali, don't get me going on to health care, because we'll go on for a few hours. But the insanity of not having enough doctors, not having enough nurses, not having enough dentists, not having enough pharmacists in the richest country in the history of the world, and having a system designed to make huge profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies, you know, that to me is pretty crazy stuff. So if Trump wants to attack Kamala Harris and Tim Walz because they believe that health care is a human right, go for it, Donald Trump. Every time you open your mouth on that issue, you're going to lose more and more support in America.
We have seen throughout this election, and basically through a lot of elections, that no matter what you think about democracy and all these other things, the economy tends to be a leading issue. There are two ways to approach this. You can talk about what the Biden-Harris administration has done on the economy, but a lot of that stuff, though interesting, is long-term, right? The semiconductors and infrastructure. This concept of here's what I'm going to do for you, sort of like Tim Walz has done in Minnesota. We're going to do these things nationally. Do you think there's a way to make that a winning formula in the swing states that you've been talking about?
Absolutely. I think two things. I think what Harris Walz have got to do is talk with pride about what President Biden has accomplished and the Vice President have accomplished. They're real important accomplishments. But second of all, I think we got to go back to 1936 and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and acknowledge the reality. Be honest about it. That in America today, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of this country. You got 3 people on top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Acknowledge the fact that we are the only major country not to have health care for all. Acknowledge the reality that we have a tax system skewed to benefit the very, very rich. Acknowledge the reality that we have in Washington, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, a $7.25 an hour federal minimum wage when we need a living wage. Acknowledge those realities and say, hey, when we get into office and give us a Democratic Senate, give us a Democratic House, we are going to take on powerful corporate interests and pass legislation which benefits working families.
I just pulled out my calculator here, $7.25. Let's assume you're lucky enough to just work 40 hours a week. That's $290 a week. Let's multiply that for 52 weeks. $15,080 is what $7.25 as a minimum wage gets you. I invite anybody to try and live off of that.
Right. And let me just say this. I know the Republican Party is trying to change their views. They are now the party of the working class. That is total nonsense. I brought up a minimum wage. It was too low. I had to do it. $15 an hour. I would go higher than that. You know how many Republicans we got to support that? 0. You know how many Republicans on my committee we got to support the PRO Act, which would make it easier for workers to join unions? 0. So these guys will stand, as they always have, with the billionaire class.
You know, it's so rare to see a mainstream televised outlet, especially one that we have had our problems with in the past, like MSNBC, actually treat Sanders with respect, actually acknowledge that his positions have been incorrectly characterized as radical and extreme and socialist. These terms, right, that people just throw around, but they can never explain to you how is it bad to want more people to have access to health care? How is it bad to acknowledge that there are 3 people in America who own more money than half of all Americans? I mean, it's sad that we just can't get an honest conversation about this stuff. I mean, I talked about how most Americans can't afford $1,000 emergency. Most live paycheck to paycheck. Just things that are horrendous, right? That people should be embarrassed by. Not the people themselves, but rather lawmakers for not trying to do anything about it, not trying to acknowledge it. And it is nice to see Sanders go on TV and have the host treat him with just a modicum of respect. And the main thing I took away from this was Sanders imploring Trump to talk about healthcare. A lot of people don't seem to remember that well, that Trump had his own healthcare proposal during the first, I'd say, half a year that he was in office. And it was horrendous. It was so widely disliked that it was voted down by members of his own party. Let's not forget McCain. And after having his healthcare proposal effectively just fail at a time where he had a majority in both chambers of Congress, he pulled it back, got rid of the individual mandate on, when he signed his tax cut, it modified Obamacare or repealed a piece of it. And for the rest of his time in office, he kind of just focused on immigration and, a couple of foreign policy issues that sort of took his focus. But there really wasn't an attempt by him for the rest of his tenure to uplift or modify the American healthcare system in any way following his first year in office, which showed that it really wasn't a priority for him. He just kind of moved on to do other things. So when he tries to say that the evil Democrat socialists are going to take away your health care, well, hell, his health care proposal was factually confirmed to take people off of health care. If Trump was able to pass, I think it was called the American Health Care Act, or as some people call it, Trump Care. It was going to remove people from the insurance they had, either, with Obamacare or through some other means. And it's just not an issue that he can, without lying, purport himself to be some champion of. Trump does not care about healthcare. It's either something that he wants to take away from people through his proposals to cut Social Security and Medicare when he was in office during his budget proposals they put out each year, or it's something that he really just doesn't care to make any positive change towards. And Sanders, being aware of this, is like, go for it, go for it. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this conversation that Sanders has is that he mentions this desire, right, to see Harris and Walz run as progressives, and I think Walz has been someone that has certainly been more to the left side of his party than Harris. Harris is kind of in her chameleon mode. We don't know what exactly we're gonna get, but picking Walz was a good sign. Really, the thing Republicans have always had over Democrats is that, like, yeah, you have Sanders, right, who can go on TV and articulate where Republicans are full of crap on multiple different issues. But Republican surrogates just are much better in terms of being able to perpetuate a claim, whether it's a true one or false one, and just stick to it to where it's just over and over again. I mean, you go and you watch some of these Trump surrogates. Lowest black unemployment, he kept our borders safe, the economy was booming. They will repeat some of this stuff ad nauseum. And unfortunately, the Democrats just don't have either people like Sanders or enough people like Sanders who will say, hey, wait a second. The Republicans have tried to cut people's health care. They're going around trying to take away reproductive rights, and also lying about the position of Democrats, because they're saying that Democrats support getting rid of a child all the way up until the moment it's born or after it's born, which is total hogwash. But my point is that you don't see Democrats who are able to just dispel that stuff the way that Republicans are able to keep ad nauseum repeating whatever lie they have about the Democrats. And that's one of the reasons why it's harder to believe their messaging is going to be as effective. But no, these are going to be an interesting couple of months, because you're going to see a real attempt by Trump he's either going to do two things when it comes to healthcare. He's either going to pretend it's not going on, doesn't exist, right? Don't talk about it at all. Or he's going to lie and say that if you elect me, I will support. And he's already shown that he's a chameleon, right? He went and said, I believe it was last year, I did a video about it, under no circumstances will the Republicans cut Medicare or Social Security or some of that effect. And while he was president, he proposed cutting those in his budget proposals. So you really can't trust him. And it's a matter of, are the Democrats able to articulate the problem, just the lies, basically? Are they able to get him on this stuff? But yeah, it's nice to see Sanders give an interview where he's treated with some respect, where it's acknowledged that these positions of his are not some radical, crazy things. And it's like, imagine living in a country, we'll repeat this one more time so we can close this out. Imagine living in a country with over $1 trillion in student loan debt, with a majority of people living paycheck to paycheck, or not being able to afford $1,000 emergency, with crumbling infrastructure, and you tell the person who wants to solve these issues, or at the very least address them, that they are too radical and that their views are too extreme. And people really wonder why a lot of young people are disenfranchised with even paying attention to any of this crap in the first place.